The more insecure you are, the lonelier you are. There's something about being the odd one out. If you're anything like me, maybe you were the only. I was the only black girl, but maybe you were the only brown girl, the only brown guy, the only gay guy, the only person, the tallest person in the room, the shortest person in the room. You were just always left out, never understood, always standing out when you don't even want to. So visible yet invisible at the same time, asking yourself day in, day out, why am I never good enough? What does everyone think of me? Why can't I be more like them? What if I never have any friends? Maybe I don't even have to ask, maybe this is you. This was your high school experience, your college experience, or your work experience. If only you could break free from your insecurities and fix the one thing that's holding you back. Or maybe that's not the case. Maybe you don't need to break free from anything. Maybe you just need a little change in perspective. Hey, if you're new, I'm Christina and I make videos for people who are feeling lonely. If there's one thing that being insecure and lonely has taught me as someone who's now no longer insecure or lonely, it's the fact that there's a massive overlap and they're very linked for reasons that you might not have expected. First up, insecurities make you create your own loneliness. If you're the sort of person that thinks, even when I'm surrounded by people, I still feel empty and alone, I'm not good enough for anyone to truly care about me. If people knew the real me, they wouldn't want to be around me. If you're the sort of person that tells yourself lots of different things and isolates yourself intentionally, you're worried about how you look or how you talk or the fact that you look lonely, then the way that you think is going to perpetuate this feeling of loneliness even more. When I was in school a few years ago, I didn't have that many friends. I kind of knew a couple of people, like on an acquaintance level, that I'd speak to in lessons, or I sat next to them and I talked to them maybe like about the work that we're doing, but never about anything like personal, like outside of school. And because of that, in my head, I was like, oh, we're just acquaintances. She doesn't really know me that well. She probably doesn't want to hang out with me. She probably doesn't want to hear me talk about personal things. So I never asked about them and I never crossed that kind of like boundary. And because I never spoke about like deeper things, it just made it go on like for even longer than it needed to. I feel like when you're insecure, you put up emotional barriers, like because you don't want people to kind of know the real you or know your insecurities. You're worried about people like learning about your insecurities and then using it against you. There's so many different reasons why you might not open up. But one thing I have realised after overcoming this is that it actually stops you from like getting what you want. You don't need to leave with your insecurities and tell everyone about them, but definitely like not like hiding away from them and feeling like it's the biggest barrier stopping you from making friends. A lot of the time it's an insecurity about your appearance or even just the way that you come across, your demeanour, how not funny you are, how boring you are. And these are the insecurities that you have in your mind, like this is why I can't make friends, like this is why no one likes me, this is why I'm always sat by myself and alone. But actually, like it's not, like it's just a loneliness you've created in your head and you've made it out to be even worse than it is. And I know that you have, because you probably have so much time to think about it and to inflate it and balloon it in your head. Another reason why insecure people are the most lonely is because of social withdrawal. Naturally, if you think you're either not good enough or you're not funny enough, too boring, not charismatic enough, not outgoing enough, too introverted, whatever adjective you want to use, you're naturally going to withdraw from the social situations that you feel like you need to be all those things to be good enough. I'll never forget the day where I was in school and this boy had just joined. He was like a new boy in school and he literally took one look at me and was like,
"You have the biggest nose I've ever seen in my life."
And ever since that day, I think it's kind of like ingrained something in my head that like I don't look that nice when my nose is on show or I don't have my glasses on. You can see how big my nose is. And because of that, I withdrew socially and I was like less confident in like going into a room or going into the playground, spending time with like new people, because I just thought that's the first thing they'll think. So you probably had a moment where your insecurity has like been ingrained and instilled because of something someone said or seen or like whatever it is, and because of that you've withdrawn. I don't need to hang out with people. I don't feel good enough when I'm with them anyway. I feel really boring. I feel really ugly. I feel like my nose is huge. Like you intensify your feelings of loneliness because you don't actually need other people around. You love your own company, but because you're on the outside looking in and you see everyone else with their friendship groups, hanging out with friends, going to parties and sleepovers, you feel like you are alone, even though you might have like kick-started it in a way by doing the social withdrawal and stepping back from everyone else. It's kind of crazy when you think about how powerful kids are in school with the things that they say and do and the way that they make fun of you, because that was such a little moment when I was 14 and it literally was one moment, one sentence he had to say for me to still, nearly 10 years later, still have it in my mind that like, is that the first thing people think when I'm not wearing my glasses? Like my nose is super big and it sticks with you. It sticks with you for so long and it takes such a long time for you to overcome it. It's not the only insecurity I've had, like my nose. There's been other things that have made me feel like I can't connect with people, and a classic one for the longest time was like I'm not funny and I don't know how to I don't know how to be interesting. I have nothing to say. Like, I'd be talking to different people and I'd give myself like a moment to try and like meet a new person or talk to a stranger, talk to someone new in school, and I'd just like literally not have the words. Chances are you're probably using your self-isolation as a defense mechanism. I know for anyone like me who's been hurt or been bullied at school, had someone tell you like the worst thing you could have ever heard in your life at such a young age, you probably used your alone time as a coping mechanism to deal with all the emotions that you're feeling. Because it's one thing to be like torn apart by a fellow student, a fellow colleague, a sibling, a family member. Like, it's one thing to be torn apart by them, but then to also feel like you have to cope with all these negative things publicly in front of them. Like, props to the people who can have a bad day and tell their friends about it immediately and go to their friends and tell them as soon as it's happened. But I would definitely need time to process it on my own and just figure out how I even feel about the situation. Like, what have I taken away from it? How do I feel? What do I want to say again? And then I feel like once I've gone through that processing, then I can open up to someone else. But chances are, if your isolation is going a bit too far, you're probably just using it as a coping mechanism for a fear of rejection. You don't want to open up to a new group of people if it means they're going to reject you and maybe give you the same attitude that you've gotten before that's made you insecure in the first place. But it's tough because this self-isolation thing and all these coping mechanisms that we use, like self-isolating, maybe like leaning on makeup too much or leaning on like appearance too much to cope with how we're insecure about how we look, it just further perpetuates this feeling of loneliness and how people won't accept you. Because if you're relying on your appearance and certain outfits, certain trainers, certain jackets and certain like makeup to feel like, oh, people will accept me now, then maybe they do accept you with all these external things, but then in the back of your mind you're going to think, well, will they accept me when I don't have this, when I'm not wearing makeup, when I don't have like a really cool outfit on, when I'm not pretending to be really outgoing and extroverted and I'm not putting on like this massive personality? Will they accept me without it? I do think coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms they're called coping mechanisms for a reason. Like, they're made to help you cope, but not to like thrive. Like, coping is one thing. I feel like coping gives the vibe of like you're just managing and you're just getting by, but you're not thriving and like living to your best potential. I definitely feel like for me to kind of get rid of this feeling of loneliness and lack of belonging, the coping mechanisms had to slowly kind of drift away and I had to let go of them and more embrace like other techniques instead. Chances are when you're insecure or feeling lonely, when you compare, you envy, and when you envy, you isolate. A classic example nowadays is anything on social media, especially Instagram. I'm not a fan of Instagram anymore. I just feel like it's so like visual and appearance and very like braggy almost. Naturally, when you're insecure, I feel like you're very focused on like the way that you come across. Like, you're so hyper aware of what people think of you, whether it's what you're saying and how you come across personality wise, or how you come across appearance wise. And because you're so aware of this, you naturally just compare yourself to everyone else. Oh, I'm coming across like this, but she comes across like this, and that's so much better. Or at least I'm a little bit better than her. Like, you naturally compare. And I made a video like this before, but comparison is honestly just like what you do when you think that the other person, when you're comparing to them, you think that what they have will make you happy. For example, you could easily compare yourself to someone and think, oh, she's so pretty. If I was that pretty, then I'd be super happy. I'd be super like content. But honestly, it's never the case. I watched this video on Jubilee, I think. It was like 100 people decide who's the most attractive. It's such a strange concept of a video, but it was really interesting. And essentially 100 people are in a room and they all have to kind of like talk to each other and decide like who's the most attractive, and it has to narrow down to one. So it's very comparison heavy, very envy heavy. And what I found interesting was the girl who was number one. A bit of a spoiler, so if you want to watch the video, go watch it. But she was essentially saying like she was surprised and she didn't feel that way. She's been told lots of horrible things because she's a model. So it just goes to show, like, if you're ever comparing yourself to someone in an appearance way, thinking they must be so happy, like it must be so easy for them, it's just not the case. Because if you could put yourself inside their minds, literally this video is the perfect example of how they're feeling. One thing I know for sure is that the more you compare, the more isolated you're going to feel, because you're living and you're telling yourself these things that aren't true. You can compare yourself to someone online and think like, oh, they have such a perfect life. Like, she's an influencer, she has this many followers, like life must be so easy for her. She gets PR packages, she gets free stuff, PR, followers, appearance. Like, it's nowhere near as hyped as you think it is. And sometimes I think it takes like meeting someone or like going inside their mind, seeing how they feel from these videos and stuff, or an influencer just being honest about their life and what it's actually like, for you to realize that, oh my god, like all these things I was comparing myself to and envying and making myself feel more and more alone about, it's actually not true. Like, all the stuff in your mind, like, it's nowhere near as true as you think it is. Sometimes I think with insecurities, you can go round and round in circles in trying to convince yourself that you just need one more thing to be happy. Like, you just need to buy a Stanley Cup and then you'll feel much happier because everyone else has a Stanley Cup and you feel left out. Or you just need to get that new makeup product. You just need to get better at makeup. You need to get better at doing your hair. That was something I told myself for ages. Like, I don't know how to like curl my hair properly, and I feel like it always looks like frizzy rather than like sleek and shiny. Like, you'll just go around in circles because once you do know how to do your hair, or you get the Stanley Cup, then it'll be a new thing. Like, it just never stops. One of the toughest things about being like a really insecure person with a lot of insecurity is you believe the negative voice in your head. And this might sound obvious, like obviously you believe the negative voice inside your head, but like I feel like there's levels to it. Like, you can be someone that has like fleeting negative thoughts. Like, we all get those intrusive thoughts where it's like you're on a bridge and it's like, you know, like you get like weird negative thoughts like that, but there's a line between that and like really believing like all these things in your head, like you are unattractive, you are boring, you are not interested, you have nothing good to say. Like, believing that is wild, because then it's like you actually live it out to be true. Like, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. It all starts from, I feel like, one moment where something didn't go to plan. Like that moment when I was like bullied on the playground and like someone told me my nose was huge, and then I like, oh, like that was evidence that maybe I was unattractive or like didn't look as good as the other girls, and then I kind of believed it and acted on it. Like, I withdrew. And because you start to act on it, you just make it, you snowball it in a way, and you make it more and more. And once it's snowballed and you do withdraw, you do sit by yourself at lunchtime, you're sat alone, like watching everyone else in their groups, then you just believe the negative voice in your head that says all these things that weren't true initially. They weren't true before that moment happened, before that first contact with someone that made you feel bad about yourself. It wasn't true before that, but it became true afterwards because you kind of acted on it. And it is tough to shift. It is tough to go from like believing all those things that you've now acted on and you've made them true in a way. You've created your own loneliness bubble. But one thing that like can massively change this, and I feel like this changed my life in so many ways, it's just affirmations. Like, whether you do it like putting little stickers on your wall, on your mirror, or reminders on your phone, there's lots of apps that are good, like affirmation apps. They kind of pop up with a reminder every hour, like something positive. I know it sounds so cringy initially to say all these positive things to yourself, but it like is a game changer, I'm not gonna lie. All of these insecurities get in the way of you trying to overcome your loneliness and try to make new friends, because you're looking for validation in ways that you don't even realize. Validation is a bit of a harsh word to use, because some people might hear validation and think like you're insecure and you like need attention, you need someone to like reassure you. There's like a harsh end of it, or like a more extreme end where someone's like really, really needy and stuff. But then there's like the less of it end where it's actually like you're looking for validation in like simple ways that I was looking for it. For example, hoping that the person walking down the street smiles at you when you smile at them, or hoping that you can strike up a conversation with someone that's like engaging and interesting, and like you can have a good conversation, like you're hoping that that would validate you. Or posting things on your story or social media and hoping that people reply, like you're posting it with the intention that someone's going to say something, you're hoping that you can get validated in that way. Or studying extra hard just so that you can get the best grade and beat other people, or impress a teacher, impress one of your professors. There's lots of ways that you can look for validation in ways that you might not have realized are like validating, and you're trying to get validation from them. But it's totally normal. We all do it to some extreme. I don't think any of us are completely off of the insecure scale. We're all on that scale, literally all 8 billion of us, but some of us are just further down or further up than others. And I feel like the extent to which you look for validation is the extent to which you are insecure. Some of us are just like hoping that when we smile at someone, they smile back. We're hoping for that like kick of validation. But then other people are like, I don't know, maybe they're in a relationship and they're constantly needing reassurance, or every time they post on social media, they're just hoping that they get a certain amount of likes or a certain amount of comments. Like it really varies, but it is a sign. The toxic thing about this though is when like you don't realize that you have it and you're kind of like relying on it. I think now that you've watched it in the video, you know that, okay, maybe I am like studying extra hard just so that I can impress someone, or just so that I can beat someone. Now that you know, it's going to be different, because next time you kind of like find yourself going that way, you might question like who you're doing it for. Another thing, insecure people love to think that they're unlovable. This isn't a therapy session, so I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but common things that you might be thinking if you're one of these people that think you're unlovable is things like saying that you're too something. Like if you say that you're too tall or too skinny, too busy, too old, too young, insert reason here, we all have our own. But But when you think that you're too something, you always just think that you're not good enough. Like there's a requirement that you need to meet before you will be good enough to be lovable and to be able to make friends, build friendships, build connections, build relationships. And honestly, I don't think you can get rid of that like 100%. I'm sure we all have like a small amount of that to some extent. But the trap that I think you can fall into is thinking that like you can fix these things. Like, oh, if I'm too fat, I'll lose weight. If I'm too skinny, I'll gain weight. If I'm too tall, I'll try and like make myself smaller. If I'm too boring, I'll try and be more interesting and put on a different personality and change who I am depending on who I'm with in a social situation. But what are all these things? All these things are looking for validation. Like you're looking to change yourself so that you can get something from other people, and it just perpetuates the feeling of insecurity and loneliness even more. Controversial opinion, but I feel like when you're insecure, you need a distraction or even an addiction. Chances are you like being busy, whether it's hobbies, music, passion, like your work, you love to work, you consider yourself a workaholic. Another common one is like social media, which, to be fair, who isn't addicted to social media? Because it's so accessible and it's so easy for anyone to spend hours distracted online and scrolling and maybe like absorbed into other people's worlds a little bit, especially if you have like a favourite person you love to watch on TikTok or Instagram. It's easy to spend so much time distracted in that and absorbed in that. Maybe you're enjoying yourself as well. Sometimes there's funny people to watch and you like just enjoy their content, but social media is a bad one as well because it's so like comparison heavy, especially on Instagram, and you start to fall into the trap of like, how many likes did it get? How many comments did it get? Like, how many views? It's a distraction, but also a source of validation. Not only is that toxic, it's just a never-ending cycle because it just will never stop. Trust me, as someone who's been on social media for a while. If you're anything like me and you struggle with social anxiety, you know that it can get in the way of a lot of things, like meeting new people, starting conversations, which is why I made a whole entire video on it. I talk about the bunch of ways social anxiety is keeping you lonely and how finding your people is actually a scam, in my opinion. But let me know what you think about that video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.